Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, having my annual Remembrance Day conversation. Dr. John Robson and his cat, it looks like.
And the cat. Here we
and
go.
the cat's there
It'll get
too.
more than just the tail. There we go.
Okay.
Geopolitical wisdom from the animal kingdom.
Perfect.
There we go.
Perfect. John, I do want to come back to what you were saying about, whether you call it wokeism or DEI or this deconstruction of Canada as a colonialist construct. And I just want to ask a even more basic question: is Britain's colonialist past now universally hated? Is there no one standing up for rule of law, democracy, enlightenment, these principles that actually have stood us in good stead?
At the moment, there aren't very many people, but fortunately, we are about to do so, at least I am, including, and I think it is so important right now, people are after the British for reparations for slavery. The British Empire went to war against slavery. It abolished slavery in its own possessions. It abolished slavery within Britain. And then it actually used its armed forces in cooperation, funnily enough, with the United States, even back when it was still technically a slave country, to wipe out the international slave trade, to stop people in a third country from grabbing people from a fourth country and selling them in a fifth country. Who else has ever done that? And you look at when the cleaning up the mess that Napoleon had made in Europe, the British came and they actually got everybody else to agree that the slave trade had to be abolished. And one of the reasons why, they'd made a cynical half deal and the foreign secretary went home to the applause of his colleagues. But then the public signed petitions at a rate that has never been seen, demanding that the government take a stronger stand against slavery. And all these people hectoring Britain and saying, oh, they ruined our way of life. Your way of life involved slavery and you weren't about to do anything about it. So you really ought to have a little humility and not erase history and pretend you had a different history than you did. Oh, and don't pretend that Canada had a different history than it did. It's not perfect. Wherever human beings are involved, you're going to have a lot of trouble. But the West's record on every issue, women's rights, slavery, treatment of the poor, charity, all this stuff is so much better than anybody else's that the notion that we would have an entire academic culture funded by the state devoted to propagating the opposite view is preposterous. It's like what Malcolm Muggeridge's liberal death wish. We need to get back to the fact that we weren't perfect and there are things we would do differently if we had them to do over, and there are things we still need to fix. But our record is so much better than everybody else's that if anybody ought to be apologizing, it's the places that Britain went and stamped out widow burning and stamped out slavery. They should be apologizing to Britain for it having been necessary instead of demanding that Britain apologize to them for having done it.
You're an academic. A lot of this seems to be springing from the academic world, at least in the first instance. I know it's spread to the corporate world now, but is there anything that can be done to have a more balanced discussion in academia?
Yes, privatize the universities. Have people pay the full cost of their education, because you need to make sure that people get a primary and even secondary education to have a fair chance in life. But people who go to university earn more money, they have higher social status, they talk more loudly at parties. They capture the benefits of it. So there's no reason to subsidize it. And it turns out that subsidizing it fills it with poison. Privatize the universities. Let's see these academics make a living in a fair market competition, whether people really want to hear what they have to say or not. I would be happy to go lecture to lecture against them in that, because I believe I can attract an audience, if I may say so, in addition to the things you listed me as doing. I'm now actually a successful YouTuber. We've had almost 12 million views at the Climate Discussion Nexus. We've got 100,000 subscribers. I even got a plaque for it. So I'm confident that people want to hear what I have to say. I am not confident that the typical sociology professor could possibly make a living selling that stuff to anybody but the government. So privatize the universities, and that will help to stop the flow of poison into our public discourse.
Something does need to be done, that's for sure. We've got 30 seconds left. You mentioned Pierre Poilievre. Is Canada broken?
I think just about everything in the Canadian government is broken. The public, I'm not so sure, but every single policy file is now a horrifying mess. And so Pierre Poilievre, if he does win, better be ready for a 6-month period in which he makes drastic changes, doesn't fiddle at the edges, really cuts down spending, really purges the bureaucracy, really cuts back on immigration, really makes dramatic changes, because after that, you run out of momentum, the bureaucracy fights back, and you've got mortgages, not an agenda. So I hope he's got a radical smaller government agenda, but
Right.
it's not a strong hope. It's what we need, not what we should expect.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing you a year from now, or if not sooner, around Remembrance Day. But thank you for your insights today, John.
Always a pleasure.